says, hold my beer, and is literally claiming Republican women can't think for themselves.
I think that women, white women in particular, want to protect the patriarchy here because it's to their benefit. Yeah. They want to make sure that their husbands do well. They want to make sure that their sons do well. They want to make sure that their children do well. And they want to make sure that they do well. Most of the women in some of these studies are married white women, and they do fall in line with what their husbands are doing. Did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding. You have Latino men, actually, voting more for him. And you have, and black men was not the story. We're not the story here because they voted almost 80% for the vice president. Right. So why do you think that uneducated white women voted against their reproductive health freedoms? And why do you think Latino men voted in favor of someone that's going to deport, says he's going to deport the majority of his community?
White women like being called uneducated white women. I think the economy matters, national security matters. But when you put people in these boxes, I think that's a takeaway from this, right?
And so why do they want to gut education? Because a less educated America is a permanent working underclass. You can pay those people a lot less. You can make a lot more that way.
And control them.
And you can control them. And that's why when you look at the stats, and I got some flack for saying college educated people voted in vast numbers for Democrats, whereas non-college educated people voted for Republicans. Well, we're seeing that come to pass, right? Mm. Those that are non-college educated are parts, it's the reason why Trump said, I like the highly uneducated. I'm loosely quoting that, but he wants
the poorly educated.
I like the poorly educated because the more educated you are, the more critical thinking skills you may have. I'm not talking about self-educated people who read. I'm just talking about people our public school system is failing them. Those are the people that are going to be harmed the most. If Democrats were really, really smart, they would really figure out a way to provide free college education for everyone. That's what Joe Biden was trying to do. That's why he wanted to get rid of that student debt, because the more educated your country is, the more you understand what is at stake in terms of your vote.
Welcome back to AllStarBuzz. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. Now, let's begin. There's been a lot of tension swirling around daytime television lately, and once again, The View finds itself at the center of controversy. The spark? A bold and divisive comment made by one of the show's co-hosts that caused enough of a stir for producers to reportedly halt the broadcast.
Schools and their kids go on to do well, that they fund students who are already attending private schools. So people with money get those vouchers, use the vouchers to pay less for their private schools, and their kids go on to do well. Where do you get the money from vouchers? You pull those money from those poor schools, poor schools. Let me just finish this. So wealthy families are overwhelmingly the recipients of school voucher tax credits. I'm not making this up. This has been studied. In 2020, a 2020 study found that only about half of states with voucher programs require teachers to have a bachelor's degree, require teachers to have training, require teachers to have licensing, require participating in private schools.
If I may get in, just to make it a conversation.
But because I have children and because I looked at
I went to public school. I believe you got to go to private school.
There is zero statistical significance.
You got to go to private school.
Because nobody can figure out what's being said here right now. No, there is no last thing right now. We're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back.
Yes.
Because you can't.
Before diving into what was actually said, let's take a moment to set the scene. Many viewers tune into The View expecting lively discussions and differing opinions, but when personal attacks and sweeping generalizations enter the conversation, that's when things get messy. And this time, it wasn't just a difference in perspective, it struck a nerve with a large audience, many of whom felt personally targeted. Right from the start, this controversy wasn't about surface-level drama. It touched on real tensions about race, gender, class, and political identity. And the host's comments didn't just ruffle a few feathers, they sent waves across social media and provoked serious criticism from viewers who felt the message was divisive and even hypocritical. In the segment that sparked all the outrage, the host made a sweeping claim that white Republican women can't think for themselves and suggested they support the patriarchy because it benefits them. According to her, these women are primarily motivated by a desire to protect their husbands, sons, and overall household status.
The Democratic Party has always been the party of the working class, has always been. Look at all the policies, they're for the people. And I think even myself, as someone who grew up in abject poverty from the Bronx, my parents lived paycheck to paycheck. They had to decide whether or not they were going to feed me or whether or not we were going to have heat. And I remember that. And I think I missed the boat in terms of realizing that there are so many Americans that still have that experience that I grew up with and that members of my family grew up with. And so I think we need to make space in this tent for the people that are really going to need it, because I got to tell you, I don't think the Republican Party is the party of the working class. I think they will hurt the working class. And so it is up to those of us who remember how that feels or who cares about that to reach out and say, come back, we can help you. And
It was a bold statement, one that many viewers interpreted as an insult to the intelligence and autonomy of a large group of women. The way she framed it made it seem as though these women were just blindly following their partners, rather than thinking critically or making independent choices. It wasn't just political analysis, it came off as personal. And for many, that crossed a line. It's one thing to discuss voting patterns or demographics. It's another to suggest that an entire group lacks the ability to reason for themselves. The backlash was immediate. Critics pointed out that such language not only alienates potential viewers, but also reinforces the very stereotypes that divide people further. What started as a political commentary quickly morphed into a firestorm about respect, autonomy, and fairness in public discourse. And that's where the conversation around hypocrisy began, because many didn't buy the message coming from the messenger. That's where things took a deeper turn. People began digging into the host's background, and what they found only added fuel to the fire. While she portrayed herself as someone who understands the struggles of the working class, her actual lifestyle told a different story. Critics were quick to point out that she attended elite private schools, became a successful lawyer, and now enjoys a multi-million-dollar net worth. To them, it felt disingenuous. How could someone who sends their children to $60,000 a-year private schools and lives in privilege claim to represent the hardships of everyday Americans? It wasn't just about her wordsit, it was about the disconnect between what she preaches and how she lives. Viewers weren't buying the "I came from poverty" narrative, especially when it was paired with condescending remarks about people who didn't go to college. That perceived hypocrisy is what really pushed this controversy over the edge. It wasn't only the insult that stunned, it was who it came from. And for those already skeptical of mainstream media personalities, this moment became another example of what they see as out-of-touch elites lecturing the very people they claim to stand for. The disconnect was ludent, it wasn't going unnoticed. That disconnect became even more apparent when the conversation turned to education and voting behavior. The host claimed that college-educated people overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, while non-college-educated individuals lean Republican. On paper, that might seem like a neutral statistic, but the way it was delivered came off as elitist and dismissive. She suggested that less educated Americans lack critical thinking skills, implying that their political choices are uninformed or misguided. But many saw this as a broad and unfair judgment, especially considering that education doesn't only come from universities. Plenty of people are self-taught, well-read, and deeply informed without ever stepping foot on a college campus. That generalization hit a nerve because it reflected a deeper cultural divide. In today's political climate, framing one group as educated and smart, while labeling the other as uneducated and easily manipulated, doesn't foster understanding, it builds resentment. And for viewers who didn't go to college but pride themselves on their awareness and common sense, this was more than a political jab, it was personal. It reinforced a growing sentiment that mainstream voices often look down on average Americans while expecting their continued support, and that tone deafness only added to the storm already brewing. As the backlash grew, more viewers began questioning not just the comments themselves, but the culture of The View as a whole. Many expected a show led by women to uplift other women, especially across different beliefs and backgrounds. But instead, what they saw particularly from certain hosts was a pattern of condescension toward conservative women. What made things worse was the silence in the room. Other co-hosts, including those who could have offered a counterpoint or defended the women being criticized, stayed quiet. To many, that silence spoke volumes. Only one panelist, Alyssa, even attempted to push back against the remarks. The rest seemed to nod along or let it slide, which left viewers wondering, where's the balance? Where's the mutual respect? For an audience hoping for meaningful conversation between women from all walks of life, this moment felt like a betrayal. The idea that strong women could only exist on one side of the political spectrum didn't sit right. And the assumption that conservative women were simply falling in line felt like it ignored the agency and values that drive so many of their choices. This wasn't just a one-off slip, it tapped into a larger frustration about how mainstream platforms treat those who think differently. That frustration reached a boiling point when countless women, especially conservatives, spoke up to defend themselves. They pushed back hard against the idea that voting Republicans somehow made them less intelligent or independent. Many of these women are educated, thoughtful, and deeply involved in their families and communities. For them, political choices aren't about blind loyalty. They're about values, priorities, and lived experience. The comments made on The View didn't just misrepresent them, they erased them. It felt like an attack on their character, their judgment, and even their love for their families. And in response, they weren't quiet. Across comment sections, podcasts, and social media platforms, women made it clear. Supporting your husband, caring for your children, and voting your conscience doesn't make you a puppet. It makes you someone who cares about your household and your future. This became a moment of solidarity. A lot of women, regardless of party affiliation, could relate to being spoken down to by people who think they know better. And what many made clear was, this being conservative doesn't mean being controlled. Being a wife or a mother doesn't mean you don't have your own mind. And no one on TV has the right to suggest otherwise. The anger didn't stop at just the comments, it extended to the larger narrative being pushed by the host. She painted herself as someone who once struggled, who knew what it meant to live without heat or food. But critics quickly pointed out the contradiction. This same person is now living a life of luxury, sending her children to elite private schools, and enjoying the comforts that come with a multi-million-dollar net worth. So how can someone who has risen to the top look down on others who are simply trying to get by, especially those who didn't have the same opportunities? It felt like she was using her past as a tool for political persuasion while ignoring her present privilege. That's what made people so angry. Not that she was successful, but that she was using a selective version of her story to speak from a moral high ground. People saw it as calculated a way to connect with working-class viewers while simultaneously insulting them. And when you combine that with her comments about education and political loyalty, the whole thing began to look less like a conversation and more like an attack disguised as concern. And that's a big part of why this moment exploded the way it did. Things escalated further when the topic of public versus private education came into the mix. The host criticized school voucher programs and spoke out about the inequality in public education funding, arguing that these systems often favor wealthy families. But again, the irony didn't go unnoticed. She herself sends her children to expensive private schools, reportedly paying over $60,000 a year. That contradiction struck a nerve. Viewers questioned how someone could condemn a system while actively benefiting from it. If private education is so problematic, why choose it for your own kids? And if you believe in public school reform, why not be part of that system personally? These were the questions critics raised because the disconnect between her advocacy and her actions was too glaring to ignore. It wasn't just about school choice, it was about credibility. The moment she spoke on behalf of struggling families while living in a completely different reality, it shattered any sense of authenticity. People don't expect perfection, but they do expect consistency. And when it seems like someone is preaching one thing and practicing another, especially on national television, it only fuels the belief that these media figures are out of touch with real-life struggles. As the conversation spiraled, it reached a point where even the show's producers had to step in. The debate had become so heated, so chaotic, that they cut to a break mid-discussion. What was meant to be a spirited exchange turned into a shouting match, with overlapping voices, unclear arguments, and visible tension between co-hosts. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unwatchable. This abrupt pause wasn't just about poor timing. It highlighted something much bigger. The View, a show that claims to represent diverse voices and intelligent discussion, had completely lost control of the conversation. What should have been a nuanced take on education and politics dissolved into personal attacks, contradictions, and confusion. And the moment producers pulled the plug on the segment even temporarily, it showed just how far off the rails things had gone. Viewers watching from home saw this as a clear sign that even the network realized something was wrong. Instead of fostering debate, the show had become a platform for unchecked commentary. And when that commentary comes from someone who's already under scrutiny for hypocrisy, it's not just bad optics, it damages the credibility of the entire show. That breakdown on live TV only deepened the skepticism viewers already felt. The moment things got uncomfortable or someone challenged the narrative, the conversation was shut down. It felt less like a talk show and more like a scripted performance zone where only certain opinions were allowed to breathe. This reinforced a growing belief that shows like The View aren't really about dialogue, they're about control. Control over the message, the tone, and ultimately, the audience's perception. And when people start to feel like their viewpoints are being dismissed or silenced, they don't just tune out, they push back. Hard. That's exactly what happened. Across online platforms, people weren't just criticizing the hosts, they were questioning the entire structure of daytime media. Why are the voices of working-class Americans, conservatives, and those outside the elite bubble so often mocked or ignored? Why is disagreement treated like disruption? For many, it felt like these shows are more interested in shaping opinion than reflecting it. And that's why the fallout from this moment wasn't just about one person's wordsit, it was about a pattern. A pattern of condescension, censorship, and hypocrisy that's been noticed for a long time. And now, people are calling it out louder than ever. This moment of backlash turned into a spotlight on the broader culture of media personalities who seem to forget where they came from or exaggerate where they've been. The host continued to reference her past hardships, talking about growing up in poverty, struggling for heat and food, and coming from a background of paycheck-to-paycheck living. But when you contrast that with her current status living in luxury, having a law degree, and earning millions, it starts to feel more like a crafted persona than a genuine story. People weren't mad that she was successful. They were mad that she used a story of struggle to position herself as relatable, all while talking down to those who are still living that reality. It's hard to take seriously when someone says they understand the poor while sending their kids to elite schools and criticizing others for not going to college. It starts to sound less like empathy and more like manipulation. Viewers saw this and felt insulted. They're tired of being lectured by people who haven't stood in their shoes for decades, if ever. And when the person doing the lecturing is inconsistent in their values, it doesn't come off as inspiring, it comes off as phony. And that, more than anything, is what people rejected. All of this culminated in one central message that many viewers couldn't ignore. These media figures, especially the ones on shows like The View, didn't actually care about the people they claim to represent. After the cameras stopped rolling, After the fiery sound bites and emotional monologues, they go back to their lives of comfort and privilege, far removed from the struggles of their audience. The truth is, a lot of the people watching these shows are working long hours, raising families, trying to make ends meet. They tune in hoping to hear something that resonates with their reality, but instead, they're talked down to, dismissed, or worse, labeled based on who they vote for or how much education they have. That's not connection, that's condescension. What really struck a chord was the realization that behind all the political commentary and so-called concern, there's a machine built on influence, ratings, and personal gain. And for a growing number of people, it's becoming painfully obvious. The divide isn't just political anymore, it's personal. It's about authenticity versus performance, connection versus control. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, drop your thoughts in the comments. See you on the next one.